Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a special treat tonight. We have the American Legion, Byron L. Silvaro, Post 82, here in honor of their centennial, and they will present the colors and lead us in the pledge.
The colors. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Black color.
I will call the September 18th Select Board meeting to order. We'll accept the agenda as written and move on to announcements.
Our first announcement is that this meeting is being video and audio recorded.
And we do have a proclamation this evening for the American Legion. Whereas the American Legion and the Byron L. Silvaro Post 82 in Nantucket have been staunch advocates of veterans and their families since 1919. And whereas the American Legion was founded on the 4 pillars of care for veterans, a strong national defense, promoting patriotism, and children and youth. And whereas the American Legion has played a leading role in initiatives and breakthroughs that have affected the lives of Americans in every community, from U.S. flag code to the GI Bill. And whereas Post 82 has fulfilled the Legion's mission since 1919 through activities such as partnering with the Scouts and the VFW to produce and sponsor the Memorial Day events and services, Veterans Day services, and Flag Day events. And whereas Post 82 sponsors local youth to attend the annual State Leadership Camp, Little League, and other youth and sports travel. And whereas Post 82 collaborates with local organizations who use its facilities for community dinners and fundraising events for nonprofits. And whereas the American Legion is celebrating its centennial in 2018-2019. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Select Board of Nantucket, Massachusetts, does hereby proclaim Saturday, September 21st, 2019, as Byron L. Silvaro Post 82 American Legion Centennial Day. Signed the 18th day of September by us. And they are having an event at the VFW on Saturday night, and there are tickets still available.
Thank you. Next, we have recognition of, I'm looking for him. Thank you. Fire Captain Earl Eldridge, known as Snip. He is retiring from the fire department after 31 years of service, and we are going to come out front and present him with a plaque. So Snip, just sort of as we get up, you can come on down and we'll thank you again. I think our Deputy Chief is going to say a couple of words.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Bates, Deputy Chief. I started on Nantucket in October of 1989, and one of the first people I met was Earl Eldridge. I worked with Earl off and on different shifts throughout my entire career. it's a sad time when he departed the department. He was a key member of the department. He knows the ins and outs of the department, but he's done his time. He's served the community since so I have it here, 1978 as a junior firefighter. He will be missed within the department, but I know that he is glad to be moving on with his life. It's a hard time because you never really have time to yourself within the department. You're always on call. So I wish him best of luck, and I hope he stays out of trouble.
Captain Tom Dixon, State Representative Dylan Fernandez's office. I have 2 citations.
Can you go to the mic?
Massachusetts Senate.
Can you go to the mic?
Yep.
Thanks.
And the Massachusetts House of Representatives. And on behalf of Senator Sear, Representative Fernandez, I'd like to present you these citations. Be it hereby known to all that the Massachusetts House of Representatives offers sincerest congratulations to Captain Earl Eldridge in recognition of 31 years of dedicated service to the Nantucket Fire Department, Town of Nantucket, and island residents and visitors alike. Thank you for your service, sir.
Can we get a picture with all of you, please? Come in the middle. Don't be shy. Thank you. Just a couple quick more announcements. Tomorrow, Thursday, the 19th, here in this room from 6 to 8, we have our 3rd plastics information session. This is relating to the 2020 commercial plastics ban that goes into effect June 1st, 2020. And there's a lot of information on the town website about it as well. And I would like to recognize our Director of Municipal Finance and his department. He has one of his staff members here, Ali Penta. We have received for the 5th year in a row the Government Finance Officer Association's Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. And this relates to the town's comprehensive annual financial report known as the CAFR. It will be online if it isn't already. So it's a very significant achievement, especially for us, considering where we were a few years ago and where we are now. So we really appreciate the hard work that the Finance Department has done, and thank you, Brian.
Okay. This is the public comment portion of our agenda for anything that's otherwise not on our agenda.
Steve Bender, 73 Orange Street. I just want to start this by saying that both my strategist and my wife told me that harsh Steve Bender nobody listens to. So this is friendly, gentle Steve Bender. February 2016, the selectmen put out this beautiful colored 4-page document called the Wastewater Plan Update, Town of Nantucket Board of Selectmen. Nantucket Wastewater Management Plan Update, Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, CWMP Update complete. And 3 main pollutants are mentioned. How can we stop the pollution of the harbor? They are the sewers, the fertilizer, and the stormwater. As I go through all of these in successive meetings, I will add another one, which is recreational vessels. What I'm going to address today, very quickly, is stormwater. I've been noticing for the past 50 years that the storm drains on Nantucket are essentially filthy. They haven't been touched. They're cleaned by the rain coming in and taking all the oil and putting it into the harbor, et cetera, and all the detritus from automobiles and so. Well, as I was poking around in literature, which I do quite a bit, I found the Chapter 91 license for the parking lot adjacent to the Nantucket Boat Basin, which is owned by First Winthrop. And I said, well, here is kind of a lead. If I can get them to perform what the state is asking them to perform, maybe this would give some impetus to the town to get going. So I went to the, and here's what the, I'm going to read what the Chapter 91 amnesty license says. It's just a short paragraph. The licensee shall, the licensee being the First Winthrop, who owns that piece of property, the parking lot, and 14 storm drains, as part of a regular maintenance regime, inspect all catch basins on the project site at intervals not to exceed 6 months in order to monitor their proper function. Sediment traps shall be cleaned as necessary within 90 days of license issuance. The license was issued in 2009. The licensee shall install and maintain in good working order sorbent pillows in all of the catch basins in the parking lot adjacent to Building G, which is the stop shop, as shown on the license plan. The licensee shall monitor the condition of these catch basins by conducting field inspections at least every 2 months. Sorbent pillows shall be replaced as necessary based on the determination of the Conservation Commission or its designee. Inspections of all catch basins and any remedial actions taken shall be documented in an inspection log by the licensee and submitted to the Nantucket Conservation Commission upon request of said commission. I'm reading from, this is from a letter from the Natural Resources Coordinator, Jeff Carlson, and the beginning of the letter says, Winthrop Management LP, P.O. Box 9507, Boston, Mass. To whom it may concern. I write to you on behalf of the Nantucket Conservation Commission in regards to your Chapter 91 license 12345-B attached for the parking area adjacent to the Nantucket Boat Basin. The Commission authorized me by unanimous consent to contact you in regards to special conditions number 10 of that license. And I just read that, condition 10. And it ends, it says, the Commission is requesting the maintenance log demonstrating cleaning of the catch basin, sediment traps, installation and maintenance of absorption pillows. Those are pillows that absorb the oil so that when the rains come, the oil doesn't go into the harbor. If the catch basins are not in compliance with the special conditions, we are requesting that be brought into compliance and documented within 30 days. We are requesting a report be filed with the Commission every 2 months to confirm the inspection and maintenance. So I'm not going to read anymore. I'm going to read you one more thing. The date of this letter. December 22, 2016. There has never been a sorbent pillow. There has never been a cleaning or an inspection, and I doubt if the Conservation Commission has any log from them or even asked them. In other words, I'm simply pointing out that government
Thank
isn't
you.
functioning.
We'll look into it.
Thank you.
And we have been provided with a copy of that letter.
Thank you for the nice version. Thank you for the nice version.
Are there any other public comments this evening? Okay. Hearing none, there's no new business. We will go to approval of payroll warrants and treasury warrants.
Move to approve.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And pending contracts. We only have one, and
We
it's
just-
a grant.
Yep. Sorry. I was just going to say, it's a grant for, under the state's Complete Streets program. We're getting the amount shown there, $114,000. This is for Sparks Avenue. It will widen the sidewalk to a single-use, it will widen the sidewalk, SUP, I can't remember what that means. Ramps, crosswalk markings, and other items that comport with the Complete Streets protocol. So it's an improvement project.
We got $1 million appropriated for that, but so this will just hopefully lower that cost. And that's from the high school to the main rotary, all of Sparks.
Yeah. Which will be great.
Yeah.
Huge improvement.
Move to approve? Sorry.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Did you have a question? Sorry, Dawn. Oh, you'll have to come to the mic. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Georgia Raisman, did we skip new business?
I just said there was nothing. There was
Oh, I'm
new-
sorry.
no new
I thought there
business.
was going to be new business called, and I had something I wanted to address in that category.
That's not generally what new business is.
I'm sorry.
Is it a
then
public
should-
comment?
Perhaps it should have been public comment, and I was misinformed.
I can go back to that if you have it.
Can we do that
Something
now, or
that's
should
not
I-
otherwise on our agenda.
Yes, sorry, then that's it.
If you have a statement to make.
Can we do that now, then?
I'm
Thank
okay.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Georgia Raisman, and I'm here as a representative of the Nantucket Historical Commission. I have our report on the Milestone Road Safety and Accessibility Improvements Plan, which has been started now and is undergoing. I've got copies of it for all of you, and I just want to summarize it a little bit right now. We completed this plan. We went on a tour of the Milestone Road on August 8th with Mike Burns, Hillary Rayport, and I, and Clement Durkees. And what we did was pursuant to Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act, which requires us all to look at this. Why you're looking puzzled?
I'm thinking that you're an advisory board to this board, and that
Yep.
this should be requested to be an agenda item. It's probably not a public comment, but
Well, then should I simply distribute this and you can
that's
have
what
it under
I'm
advisement?
thinking that it should come on as an agenda item if
Well,
we're going to
I'm
get
not even
a
sure what this
report.
is, but I think it sounds like something that probably should be submitted to town admin, and then we can determine what its disposition ought to be.
Yeah, it's just not general. An advisory board doesn't generally come in under public comment.
Okay.
It's something that goes through town administration and gets on an agenda.
When should I distribute the report then?
You can
I can give you that to you now?
give
Okay.
them to Erica now.
I already have it. I have it. Matt has it. Matt.
I have it through NPDDC, and I think it's a very well done report, and I think it gives us more sort of the 106 process in the historic review would be very helpful with some of the issues that we sometimes face, I believe, and I think it's I think the report that they did was amazing, and I'm really glad we have a historic commission up and running, and I hope that you guys continue.
I'd like to have it on an agenda so that we can comment and that it's publicly posted.
Good, well,
And
look
that's what I was
forward-
going to ask. I was going to
Great,
ask
thank
that
you.
it be on the agenda so we can talk
So
about
we'll
it.
make that,
Good, I
And I
look
think
forward to
soon-
doing
we'll
that.
figure that out.
I think the sooner the better, because some of the decisions, especially in regards to the report, are going to be happening soon, and we'd like to get that. I would like to get a letter
Okay.
to Mass DOT sooner rather than later.
Excellent, thank you so much.
Thank you. Consent items, we do have a resignation from, as a planning board alternate. And, let's see,
I'd make a motion to approve with a letter of thanks.
second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and we'll advertise that open position, along with maybe re-advertising some of the other open seats on like human services. Okay. Citizen departmental requests. We have a request for a legacy transfer of a taxi license. And I believe that the people are here for that, but if anyone wants to move ahead to a motion, that's probably fine.
I was just going to disclose that my mother does own a taxi, but it wasn't a conflict of interest.
I don't see any issues, but if they want to speak,
Good evening. I'm Bruce Watts, owner and operator of Chief's Cab for 17 years, a little over. I'm here tonight to request a transfer. I just, health-wise, cannot do it anymore. And I would like the board to go along with this request and hand it down to my son, Brett Watts, who's in the back row. I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Chief, are you sure that's your son? He's pretty handsome.
Unbelievable.
Motion to approve the transfer?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you very much.
I don't know how you're going to be able to wave to everybody like he does, Brett.
Slow down.
Town managers report?
Okay, this is the time of year right around now when we typically give the board our preliminary budget projections for the upcoming fiscal year. This is for the general fund only. Enterprise funds will come at a later time. And finance director is going to take us through. And at any point, if the board has questions, feel free to ask.
Good evening, everyone. So as the town manager mentioned, this is generally when we start the budget process, presenting where we think some of the things will end up to you and to give you an idea of some of the things that are still open or need further refinement and discussion as we move through the process. So we generally start with kind of what is Proposition 2.5. It's the initiative from 1982 that limits the amount that we can raise the levy by to 2.5%. Not to confuse, property taxes can rise by more than 2.5%. We are just not allowed to raise in real and personal property taxes more than 2.5% of the prior year. It's a levy limit. The levy limit is calculated annually in conjunction with DOR. As we go through this presentation, I will note that fiscal 20, because we're working on the recap through the recap process now, has not actually been done because we're still working on certification of new growth, and so it's a projection on where it's going to end up at this point. So how is the levy limit increased as we go through this process? The allowable 2.5% increase to real and personal property taxes, any new growth that can be picked up and then ultimately certified by DOR. Overrides, which would be permanent increases to the levy limit, and temporary exclusions, which include debt exclusions and capital exclusions, which we have historically used in the past debt exclusions and have in recent years started to use capital exclusions as a way to make some capital expenditures and be able to move forward in the capital plan.
Excuse me, Brian, what's the easiest way to describe the difference between debt and capital exclusions?
The easiest way, the debt exclusion is for, well, capital exclusions are really for just an item, usually typically for 1 year in length. We raise the taxes and then we may or may not decide to. Over the last couple of years, we have identified items that could be paid for through a one-time increase. Debt exclusions are generally for much longer and much larger projects than capital exclusions. So debt exclusions would be something like what we talked about, our island home, 50 or 55 million you would not raise in 1 year on the property tax rate. Capital exclusions, like the SCBAs, which are 90,000 or things of that nature, is something that you could potentially raise on a one-time instead of going and borrowing.
I asked that because I feel that it's hard when I try to explain the difference between, when people say, oh, it's a budget override or the debt exclusion and capital exclusion.
So one thing to point out is these temporary exclusions allow us to go above the Proposition 2.5 levy limit only for the defined time period for those. Right. So with a capital exclusion, it's 1 year. Debt exclusions are for the life of the debt until that debt's been amortized and extinguished. Okay. So for fiscal 21, as I mentioned, since we're still going through the fiscal 2020 process, we're projecting that the levy limit starting point would be $77,330,000. If we raise the maximum allowable 2.5% increase, that would raise an additional $1.9 million. We are starting at 700,000. Right now, it looks like new growth potentially may be certified around $900,000 this year. In discussions with the assessor, she felt until we had the actual certification done that the comfortable starting point was 700,000. And as I note, these numbers more than likely will change a little bit as we continue through the process. That would give us an allowable levy limit of $79.9 million. We have $9.2 million worth currently on the books of debt exclusions, which give us a maximum allowable levy limit to be raised in real and personal property taxes of $89.1 million. Local estimated receipts. Last year was a really great year. So we have looked at motor vehicle excise tax, given the fact that it's consistently, we raised over $3.3 million last year in excise tax. We've raised it a little over $400,000 this year. We feel confident that we'll be able to meet that number. Rooms tax, we've raised to $3.4 million. We raised $3.8 million, actually collected in fiscal 20, $3.8 million, but I am not comfortable going all the way to $3.8 million just because of the uncertainty with some of, how the tourist population will react to the Airbnb tax, and without seeing the first quarter, I don't want to go much past where we're at now. Meals tax we raised to $1 million. Boat excise we've kept static. Most of the other ones we have kept static except for investment income. We actually generated over $300,000 for the general fund in investment income last year, so we have raised it from the $125,000 to $200,000, which
Brian?
Essentially, yes.
Does the room tax, is that including the short-term rental tax? Or is
It
that
does
anywhere?
not. We are not allowed to calculate that. As noted at the bottom under first bullet point being A, we cannot in this budget cycle anticipate any of the changes to the local option for the short-term rental tax. DOR will not do it. We have talked to them about that, but they need one full cycle or one full year of history before they would allow us to use that in any of those projections. So the $3.4 million is strictly based on the $3.8 million that we collected by June 30th of 2020. As noted in another slide, it is one of the things that we're waiting for to see. We will receive the first payment for rooms and meals tax in September, so we'll have an idea whether this 3.4 is a relatively stable number, because generally we receive the bulk of it in the September and December payments. Also to note here too, because we have been asked quite frequently, not in the local estimated receipts, we have made no provisions for any of the marijuana tax receipts either, because we need that one full year of history before DOR will let us start planning on what we may be able to use. So neither one of those two factors have been added into these into this budget.
So those will end up being in free cash.
They will end up creating, or they'll be ending up going to free cash. Yes, the impact of those in this for fiscal 21, and then we will be able to start planning in fiscal 22 and beyond. So revenue projections in total, as I said, $89.1 million in real and personal property. We're estimating this number, the abatements and exemption is also somewhat of a fluid number. We typically start at $1 million, and it generally will kind of wind down as we go through the process. The assessor, Debbie Dilworth, and her staff do a really great job of making sure people have ample notice and discussions about the valuation. So we try to eliminate as many abatement or requests for abatements as we can before the process. So this number may end up being reduced, which ultimately give us a little bit more of revenue to work with, but that's where we typically have started. The 11.49, which was just shown in local estimated receipts. The cherry sheet for fiscal 20 is $3.8 million for state locally, for state split between, Chapter 70 and general aid. So we're starting at that point. Typically, the way the governor has worked is that whatever the general revenue consensus is, which they meet in early December to come up with that for the budget cycle, they will automatically give that next year to towns in unrestricted general government aid. We get about $75,000 in unrestricted general government aid, so the increases don't materially impact us. The majority of our aid actually comes from Chapter 70, which they don't really project what it'll be in December. The budgetary cycle will ultimately determine that for us. This kind of just shows the historical growth from 15 to 19 in revenue. So as you can see, like I said, rooms and meals tax has continuously gone up almost $200,000 over fiscal 18. So from a local estimated receipt standpoint, we've done very well over the last few years. Expenditures, this unfortunately is just such a large spreadsheet to try to paste into one slide, so I do apologize for this. We've kept salaries static because, as everybody knows, all the contracts are expiring, so we've made no provisions in the salary lines yet for those. And probably actually, even I have to go to another spreadsheet to look at it here. We've increased operational expenses by about 2% along the way between town and school. Medical insurance, I know that the trend and discussion with our insurance consultant has been medical inflation is about 7%, but because we're self-insured, we have actually budgeted for 9% because we have to take dollar for dollar all of our claims, and we still have a very long way to go before we get to the start of next fiscal year. So this number, as I always say, could potentially change and will be adjusted and reviewed on a continual basis between now and the budget cycle. Barnstable County retirement, we're planning, as we have for the last few years, for 8.5% increase. We have the annual other articles, unpaid bills, the same number. We haven't really hit 20,000 over the last couple of years, but that's typically where we plan for. County assessment, the same at 170,000. The contract reviewer, Health and Human Services, at 450,000. Reserve fund and OPEB at 500,000. We have not put in here, and as will be noted in another slide, we still have ongoing discussions about what may need to be transferred to affordable housing, so I have not made a provision in here for that yet. The town and school, 1% of prior year receipts into real and personal property and local estimated receipts into capital. And then the enterprise fund, general fund subsidies to the ones that we do, which is solid waste. Those have been increased by 2.5%. As you'll note, we have no landfill mining because that program ended on June 30th of 2020. And the one that's in there, I have programmed $3.1 million, which is essentially the additional $1 million that we would have to cover from the estimated or projected $1 million decrease in retained earnings for our Island Home. The other note in here is that our cherry sheet, or state assessments, is substantially increasing. The majority of this increase, or over $436,000, is all related to the decision to move to year-round bus service. So all told, we have a projected deficit right now of just about $1.2 million. As I always warn people, this is a starting point. It's not going to be where we end up, because obviously we have to have a balanced budget, and there's a lot of time and a lot of potential changes that will occur over the next months before town meeting.
Can I just note that we do have a request? It was sent to all of us from the CRC for Health and Human Services to increase their budget by $200,000.
And that has not been programmed in because
right.
that
No,
came
I
after
just
this
wanted
was
to
done.
note it because
Sure.
you've got it in as what it is this year, and they've put in that request.
Again, we've now typically tried to show you what the impact or the growth in salaries from expenditures in the general fund on an actual basis between 2015 to 2019 has been, and then a breakout of all the other articles that are in that compilation. And then the slide that really kind of reiterates the fact that there's a lot of moving pieces as of September 18th to be determined before we actually get to town meeting. Free cash is going to be certified. DOR is actually coming out because we have a new rep. They'll be here on December 9th. We expect that by the 11th, that Friday, free cash and retained earnings for all the enterprise funds will be certified. Local estimated receipts will get the first quarter at the end of this month, so we'll see if it's substantially more, then we'll know that there is a significant impact with the additional expansion of the tax. Again, as I mentioned, union negotiations. Health insurance is always one of those things, as I said, even though medical rate inflation is about 7%, we're being self-insured. We're carrying a little bit higher anticipation at this point, and we refine that on pretty much on a monthly basis with our advisor. Retirement assessment, we've projected 8.5%, but that may change. We'll get the notification around November when they have their audit and their review of the performance. Local aid is always something to be determined because there's 3 rounds of budget cycles and a conference committee to go through. We're statically projected to get no less than we got in fiscal 20. Year-round NRTA and the impact, as I mentioned, was about $436,000, which we now have to fund. Any potential transfers to Affordable Housing Trust Fund, potential override, which we have discussed potentially for Island Home, and then ongoing discussions about whether we want to join the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund, which the town manager and I have conferenced in on one meeting and attended one meeting in person. There hasn't been a lot of other movement on that I remember since the last one. And then a discussion about whether we want to do it internally and basically kind of like the same as the Community Preservation Act and create the Wastewater Infrastructure Improvement Fund, which would keep all the dollars here versus sending them and then reallocating them. So if there's any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them at this point.
Just a reminder, our Island Home at the moment is approximately $2 million coming out of the general fund.
This year, it's $2,026,000, yes, in
Okay.
fiscal 20.
Okay.
And in that presentation, I did program the 3.1, which is essentially the additional million that we would have to find.
Right. Okay.
I've not
Thank
built any of the other provisions or discussions into this.
you. Right. So that's one big thing that could change that final number, that deficit there, if we were to consider the override.
If we consider the override and it was successful, it would certainly change it to having available, there would be some available levy capacity created, but yes, it would have a marked difference on the way the picture looks.
Right. Thanks.
The picture looks better than I thought it did because you have it programmed. Yeah, I got to be honest, it looks better than I thought it did. There'll be free cash. We should really, I think, and I'm hesitant about doing that override until we know what we're doing there, until we figured out, how we're going to operate it and what we have to, sort of figure out with, union contracts and everything else. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. I'd be very hesitant to support, what you're talking about, especially seeing as we're so close. NRTA would be another thing I'd look a little closer at. Are we getting our money's worth in year round? What was the ridership? I know it sounds good, but is there another way to do it or a better way? We should dig into that. That's almost $500,000. So between a couple things, for this year, we could almost be there.
Well, it should be noted too, though, with NRTA is that we, regardless of any discussions that the board and the advisory committee may have, or however it may work out into the future, there's an obligation that the $1 million is an absolute.
Yes.
Roughly about for fiscal 21. There's no way to bargain out of that piece of it. Or making changes would not impact that. It would impact 22 and beyond.
And the other warning, it was we made some changes to the health insurance plans, which helped us for a couple of years. Though, if he warned us that those were going to go away after like 2 years or so. So, we may be going back up in that regards. I think we should be really looking closely at, is there another way to, to bid it out to other companies or, really dig into the health insurance. It's, it's for the town's benefit. It's for the employees' benefits. How do we, what is it we can do to control that cost? We can't have, wage growth at the level we have it now and health insurance growth and retirement growth. They don't all add up. So, we really do need to, we've got our finances in order, but now I think that we have them in order, it's time to, be allowed to really look at some of those things. Sure. And I know you're talking about it, which is kind of why I'm talking about it on the camera. It would be very important for the town.
I think we need to get some a little more board feedback on this Island Home piece. It's a huge portion on where we stand on the idea of a subsidy. Not necessarily a formal vote, but some feedback as a whole.
I think we're at a point where ongoing, while this year we might be able to balance it out, the reality is that in the near future, especially if we're going to be upgrading the building, we are going to need more money for the operating. And I think, Matt, you're right. We need to understand exactly what those operating expenses are and all the things that you mentioned, the contracts, union contracts, all of that. But I think we need to know that there's a commitment to support the operating costs now before we potentially make a major investment in the design and a potential building. Because again, it feels like now for 3 years, we've been putting it off. For 3 years, Brian has been telling us this needs to be a consideration. So I think if it's not this year, it'll be next year. Yeah, I have one comment on the NERDA, but I'll wait until other board comments on Ireland Home.
Rita pretty much explained how I feel. And I said this last Wednesday. We need to see if the voters and the public want to fund this through an override in perpetuity before we spend $5 million on a design and 50 or 60 million, or even have those conversations. So I want to see where we're at. I don't think we're going to do it blindly, right? We need to do like Matt's suggesting, dig in a little more. But I'm for an override, mainly before we're going to go forward and spend $65 million.
I feel like you two both summed it up. Kind of, we all are in agreement that we kind of want to see how the voters feel and if it's worth pursuing, the design and the $50 million build.
I think if the decision is not to pursue an override, at least by the voters, then that will significantly change how we approach Ireland Home and the operating costs and having it be embedded within the general fund over the next however many years. So I do think in terms of what decisions we make, what the building looks like, what our options are, is very much tied to that decision. And if it stays in the general fund, if it gets voted down, but again, that's a big big difference for the general fund for ongoing in perpetuity.
Well, and again, to bring it properly to the voters, we have to know what it is we're bringing, and to be able to explain to them how much it's going to increase year after year after year. You have to know, what the parameters are. Are we doing a small house model? Are we doing an institutional model? How much more is it going up? Some of the, we went through it, but some of those projections were incorrect. Some of the things that were on there were incorrect. 2.5% wage growth was projected. We're looking at 6.4 here over the last 6 years. So, so I think that we need to put those real numbers in and bring it, if we're going to do it, bring it to the voters with the actual facts. I think it's popular and I think people support it, but I think that there are changes we have to make that as soon as we vote it, we will not be able to make those changes. And so I think that, just don't want to put the cart before the horse. And, so anyway, I will continue to beat the drum on understanding what we're doing and getting those things in place first. But I can understand where everyone is coming from. And I understand getting a temperature of the voters, but let's get the temperature with the full facts and the right facts.
Can we just ask, are those numbers incorrect with the salary increases? I mean, I don't want that to just sit out there.
What are you? I'm not. Are you? You're referring to the CLA intuition model?
The model we had last week had 2.5%,
right,
as the wage increase.
Right. So that's. I mean, that model allows us to model anything we want that the community or the select board would like us to model. That was built with CLA to be able to model anything. The 2.5% was the starting point. We can model it at 1%. We could model it 10%, whatever those numbers are, and we can certainly do that with that modeling that we built in conjunction with CLA to be able to do exactly what you're talking about. They're not incorrect in so much as that's what we told them to start the modeling review at. That is based on going from fiscal 20 on. So I would not say that they're incorrect. They're a simple assumptions that we made in the model that can be changed dynamically at any point to see how certain things impact it. Just like I think they had a different number for health insurance than what we may have ended up at. So we can change those in a dynamic model to do this and give you the information. So I don't think they're incorrect. I think it's just the assumption that we may want to change to see what the impact is.
Yeah, he explained it to us. He said he was taking it from national, national and regional numbers.
Yes.
And I said, well, geez, those aren't our numbers. Let's plug our numbers in. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying it was, I'm just saying let's understand what we're doing, and that's all I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And that means the numbers that we saw last week were understated when you put our history in.
Yeah, I mean, if we can change them in ways to see it, but also just to make note, when you talk about the wage growth, that we're talking strictly about the general fund there. I won't I don't know off the top of my head what the compound growth rate right now for Island Home is. It could be substantially, it could be different than the 6.4 that you're referencing, because that's general fund money. And it will be.
It will be, because
Yes.
it looked better the last couple of
Yes,
times, because
so-
they don't have as many staff.
Right.
So it will look better, but if you took the per head unit, per person percent, it wouldn't. So that's what number we need, is the per person percent. Because we're gonna add more people to do the new Island Home, not fewer. It's gonna take more people to clean it, it's gonna be a bigger operation. If we go to a greenhouse model, we might save some money, but that doesn't seem the way direction we're going. So there's things that we have to understand
Right.
in order to have an intelligent financial conversation about it. And I'd like us to understand that really well before we get in front of town meeting, or we'll get lambasted.
Did that answer your question, I hope?
I think so.
Okay.
But I mean, my understanding on the cost of living increases for Island Home staff is 1% a year.
That
right
was what
now.
the contract that is expiring
current
on June,
contract.
that's what the current expiring contract on June 30th did have, yes. Those projections were built based on what will happen on 21 and onward.
Madam Chair, I think we also need to be on the same page with what we mean by wage increases, because I think what CLA was getting at is that's the COLA. That's not the all-in wage increase. There are step increases. There may be overtime. There may be shift differential, all that kind of thing. They were just talking about the COLA, I believe. Also, I think their projection regarding staff was not a material increase in staff with the model that they were presenting.
Right, I
last
think
week.
their recommendation was to the 3-star level, which is what the staffing pattern, I believe, was, so. But whatever you would like, or however, we will work within the model and make the structural changes to give you whatever you need.
Just really quick, I was pretty confident that CLA was giving us a baseline model that we can now ask all these questions, plug in assumptions, and I think it would be very interesting to see where some of these questions, what has the biggest impact on the ongoing operating costs. Based on the public comment last time, maybe the staffing does have to increase because there's more square footage, but maybe, is that 5 people, is that 2 people, and what does that really mean? I think CLA has given us the baseline to ask all those assumptions. I think the model, we've answered a couple times over, the space is limited for a greenhouse model. So the choice is, based on what the voters decided, is to have this hybrid model. As much as greenhouse is the direction everyone else is going, I think we're working with a hybrid institutional model. But I do think CLA, now we have the opportunity to ask questions.
I think that this year is the year to talk about the override, because if it doesn't pass, we can probably figure it out, but that may not be the same case next year. And I think that I think that we should take the 2 articles to town meeting concurrently, but I think the first conversation in the order of the warrant is the override, because I want a commitment from the community that this is a service that they want to continue to subsidize. I'm willing to commit to it in my taxes, but I need to hear that from everybody else. I think it is an important service. We're 30 miles out to sea. We don't have multiple other options. And the people who really need it, really need it. I've said this before, but I need that commitment before I spend $5 million designing a new building. And that's going to be the second ask, but I would like to have them both on this coming town meeting. This is way overdue.
I mean, from my perspective, as we've talked, and obviously I've said before, it's not easy to stand up here and try to make the ask to override the taxes for this purpose, but it would be difficult to try to find another $1 million, because don't forget that $1.2 million deficit has built that in, but it will be hard to do. It would not be an easy task to do, and the board has a lot of other initiatives that need to be plugged in and funded, and it would be a very difficult task to be able to try to do that if we didn't put the override on, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Brian, you mentioned something to me just almost in passing. Could you kind of get into policy, if it's good or not to rely on retained earnings?
It's a very bad policy. It's not a policy that it would typically be something that I would absolutely endorse and advocate for on an annual basis, but we have a little bit of a more unique situation with what we're using it for here. Our financial policies, specifically free cash, and it really kind of goes down to the other enterprise funds, really does not want us or maybe even allow us to use what I consider to be somewhat of an unstable revenue source, because I cannot guarantee we'll get it on an annual basis at the level that we are. So our financial policies really do dictate that retained earnings and free cash should be used for one-time expenditures or put into stabilization funds or whatnot, those things. We have not had the ability within the general fund, obviously, to fund $4.7 million within Proposition 2.5, and we've had this discussion, obviously, as has been noted a few times, and we've had the ability, fortunately, with retained earnings, to be able to fund it. It's not a policy that I think we should continue with, because I don't know that 1.6 million or what the final number that's certified by the state for Island Home retained earnings is going to be consistently at that number. So I don't believe that it's a sustainable way to continue to fund an operation that we are in the business of funding at this point.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make one quick comment on NERDA. I think that we should be monitoring its performance, but I think it's more like a business. It's 3 to 5 years before we can really see how well it's doing and if the ridership is worth the expense. I think it's too early to really decide whether or not we should pull the plug on it, but definitely be monitoring it and looking at other options. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think we need to continue to analyze how the routes and the times and what's working for people, what's not working for people. But it's going to take time for people to really rely on it. And if we start talking about canceling it, nobody's going to go out and get rid of their car because they're going to ride the bus. We need to just make it part of our culture. And when we institute the potential paid parking next summer, that could change people's thoughts on whether economically it makes more sense to ride the bus.
I think in the winter, we should look. I don't know what the ridership was. I don't think it was. We've looked at it, but I think we should look closely. I'm not sold it's going to be great as a fixed route. I think it could be as a microbus or with an algorithm picking people up closer to where they live. I think with 1 or 2 small vans doing that could cost us about the same and actually be used. I think looking at it as solely a fixed route might not ever be successful. And so that's what I'm talking about. And the problem with this, just like with the prior issue, is what happens here, what I see anyway, unless there's some pressure, then the look never happens and the analysis never happens, and we'll go on with the status quo. And so that's how I felt about Island Home on some of the key issues. I was asking for what. First, I could go on forever about that. I think there's some things we haven't done that I've asked for that we haven't done. And so I think that's the issue for me. And the same thing here, we can say, what is the ridership? But is there another way to do it? When things are changing, is there a better way to do it? And that's sometimes, you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And actually things aren't all nails anymore. There's other ways that we're doing things. And so I just think, we've got to be a little more open on some of them. That's all.
Well, there may be able to be something like a direct shuttle into town from here in the winter where people park and hop the bus, and it's like every 10 minutes. Might be more reliable for commuters.
And I'll keep pushing for the data platform to try to figure out where people are populated, because not having the service to Nantucket in the winter might not be the best idea. Maybe we do need it out there. So I think it's really important to see where do people live, where do they work, and really try to make the bus a commuter bus, not just a visitor bus.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think we need to be committed for 3 years, but I think the buck stops with us. We are the NERDA board. So if we want more answers and more research and to talk to Paula and whoever else every other week, every other month, we could do more. This is me included. Chrissy and I met with Paula the beginning of the summer, and then we have it since. So Christine and I are committed to trying to work with her more. But I think as a board, we should have more updates, and we should push some of these things that we're saying right now, because we say it and then we start talking about island home and coastal resiliency and really big important things, and kind of forget about making the bus service more efficient. So I think we should kind of move that up in our priorities of just things that we discuss, because it is part of our transportation goals, getting people out of a single-use vehicle.
We're also, the other thing I want to say is we're looking at a budget now when times are good. And this is the time when we should be worried about what happens in a downturn, because we aren't going to have the pile of free cash. We aren't going to have, as much, we're not going to have 500 new cars, being signed up, and we're not going to have as much room occupancy tax. A lot of that went down last time. And we had to do hiring freezes and make some tough decisions. So I think that, that's where I'm sort of I've talked about those in executive session, and I'm talking about those now. This is the time to be thinking about the bad days are not far away. The financial, possibilities, it's not going to go straight up forever. And I think we're on the brink potentially of sort of a flattening and sort of a not a great economy for a number of years. And we should be planning for that, not, and some of the things that we talk about, I think, aren't planning for that. So.
On one hand, sorry to keep going on about this, but it's important. On one hand, I think having Nerdy year-round is one of the most expensive ways to do some of the things that we want to do in our strategic plan. On the other, there's a lot of people, and it doesn't cover it, but there's a lot of people who depend on it, who don't have cars and don't want to have a car and really do depend on it. And we here don't use the bus. Christy uses it every once in a while. I do, but we don't need it to live here. And there's a lot of people that do. So I just want to keep that in mind. It is a very expensive way to do it, but not everybody can afford a car.
My kids use it all the time. And that prevents me from driving.
Yeah.
But I just, in general, I feel like there are certain services the government needs to subsidize for their community. Affordable housing, which we approved $25 million at last year's town meeting. A service like the Island Home, and a service like year-round bus service. They're not going to be break evens. They're just human services. They are things that we need to subsidize to provide those things for the community. And we're not the same as a private business that needs to be in the black.
I don't think you should. I just don't want people to think the mistake that I don't think we should do them. I think we should do them. I just think we should negotiate and manage them and do them effectively, and not just give the store away. So that's what So I'm agreeing with you. The Island Home, I'd love to see, but at one number it makes a lot of sense. At other numbers it doesn't. And especially if things are changing. So we really need to be. Finish a couple of the other things that need to be done.
So let's specify what those are.
Well, I've done it. I'll tonight. Is it?
Well, if you're ready, or later, it's fine.
Well, no. I think one of the things one of the things that was explained is you can't have a small house model, but actually, that they do have small house models in 2-story buildings. So. That was given, like sometimes it was a false dilemma. It was given as, we drew it in this spread out area on this lot and it won't fit. Well, you could draw it on 2 floors. And that was, that small house model was going to save money. We had one of the employees come and say, geez, this is going to be hard for us. We're working out of the kitchen, and how are we going to get to everybody? So she was kind of, she didn't say it, but she was describing a small house model. You don't have that issue. And then if we were going to go to a small house model, they have asked there'd be a list of, union changes that would have to occur. I've asked, what is that list? There'd have to be a change of working conditions. Adding employee housing, which we talked about last week, that's a change of working conditions. All those things should be understood, should be agreed upon before we agree upon $50 million building and $14 million a year of override expenses. And so that's what, I've been saying this for 2 years now. Let's figure out up front what it's going to be. Make sure that, we're in agreement with the employees are in agreement, and then we bring it to the town as all unified. And what we're doing now is, as I've said all along, is the easy part. Everyone's going to vote for the building. That's a piece of cake. Running it after, right now we're struggling with a $3-4 million. The numbers last week were, 10 million more than that. So if that 14 million is going up 7% a year, we're going to be having the amount we have right now. We're going to have that problem every single year. So that's what I'm talking about.
The one thing we should probably make sure to understand when we're talking about the 14 million is that's debt service, which they've put in this projection. However, my assumption is that debt service would be financed through the general fund through an exclusion. So
I understand that.
Yeah. So that isn't going to really perpetually continue to expand on the deficit from the operational standpoint. It's just showing what the entire subsidy would be if the debt was in there.
I understand. My point is though is if this is growing at 7%, it'll double every 10 years. There was no maintenance or repair in that, out to year 10. So, and then we have to layer that on in year 10. We should be putting that aside from year 1. So there was things like that in a model which we can do, and I agree we can do that. But I just think that something growing at 7% doubles in 10 years.
With respect, though, to the point about the repairs and whatnot, if we had an override, if an override were successful, okay, that would allow us as a community to essentially not have to use retained earnings that the Island Home generates, which are theoretically primarily generated by the certified public expenditure reimbursement. And that money would be able to roll every year and be recertified so that there would be the available money for repairs as we went through the life cycle of the building, or not large repairs, but the normal operating repairs could be funded by that number. So that would be one way that we would accomplish that concern.
And the other issue that we really should be looking into is stuff that Kevin was talking about last week. What people are doing is changing, and we need, the critical care nurse, we need that level, but we also need, sort of a level underneath that. And one of the proposals from 6 or 7 years ago was to sort of split that. In a small house model, we were going to have 1 or 2 wings doing one and a couple wings doing the other. And there's some cost savings in that. You're aligning your needs to your actual staffing. There's things like that we really should be doing. What we looked at last week was sort of just taking what we have now and replicating it in a bigger, more expensive building, and that which I agree is needed, but all the other stuff is needed underneath too. And so those are the points I'm trying to make.
I agree that we need further analysis on the number of beds and the level of care beds that we put in the final design. But I think we need to commit to continuing to run the facility in the short term as it exists. Any other thoughts on that, or on the budget in general?
I just know we received the request today for an increase with Health and Human Services, and just wondering when we would discuss that as a board, if it would be today or if it would be a different meeting.
I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we'll probably just do we want to? You're welcome.
I'm just in favor of increasing that budget. I think the services provided to the community are too vital. And last year, I wrote down they received requests for $727,000, and we're only able to give out $450,000. And I think the community, we can't afford not to have these services, and so I think it is something we should consider funding more.
I would suggest that is something that would be considered by the board and administration as we're proceeding through the budget development process. Everybody wants more money. Everybody wants more services. There's only so much to go around. I have multiple groups are already trying to get a hold of the short-term rental tax and the marijuana tax, and we've already preliminarily allocated money we don't even have yet to them, or in the future there will be funds going to some of those groups. We've been talking at cabinet for several months now about a potential economic downturn, and we have been letting everybody know that fiscal 21 is not going to be, but probably a year where we're going to be adding a lot of staff, adding a lot of services. The board has a number of initiatives that it wants to fund, including potentially a new department of sustainability, and there's a cost to all of that. So I don't know that you need to talk about it as a separate agenda item. Certainly the board can do that if it wishes, but then probably a lot of other groups are going to want to come in and talk about it as well. So this isn't the first time we've heard we need more money for human services or whatever else is out there. And when town admin provides the board with its budget recommendations, we'll probably have some different scenarios to show you as to how it potentially would be able to be worked in and what the impact of that would be on other services.
Well, I agree that I'd like to see that as we continue to discuss the budget process and how we could at least increase their budget in some way this year, if it's not to the full 650, and also with the idea that a good portion, what did we commit to for the marijuana tax? Is it 25% of that money will go towards human services?
It's substance abuse, but it would go to probably our conduit would be
Through
the contract review
CRC.
committee to make recommendations. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I think FY22 is when the marijuana revenue will be coming in, not this round.
Good on the budget?
Yep.
Okay,
Thanks, Brian.
thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren has a bit of a report for you. We have an adoption of a policy that is needed in order for us to become eligible to be designated as a green community, which is something the board has been discussing and is a goal of ours. So Lauren's going to explain the policy and then give an update about where we are with getting designated.
Yes, thank you, Libby. Good evening to the board. Lauren Sinatra, Energy Coordinator. Hoping to give a brief overview of where we are with our Green Communities application. We've steadily made progress since we last presented to the board on this topic in March of this year. So since then, we have completed 3 of the 5 criterion required to become a green community, which is a designation in Massachusetts, which would allow a municipality or city eligibility for hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding every year for energy projects, energy efficiency, renewable energy, even electric vehicles. So since March, due to annual town meeting approvals, criterion number 1, which was as of right siting a solar overlay district at the landfill, was adopted, and we were able to complete all of our tasks to complete the requirements for that first criterion. Related to criterion number 1 is letter from legal counsel confirming that there's nothing in the town's bylaws or codes that would prevent an expedited review of a large solar PV project at that landfill site of the solar overlay district. So we've completed the second criterion. The criterion number 5, which is the third completed by the town, was the adoption of the Stretch Energy Code, which became effective in the town on September 1st of this year. We did a lot to roll it out. Contractor education, a lot of public service announcements. In speaking with our building commissioner today, he alerted me that there have been no issues with code compliance, permit compliance. HERS raters are now submitting certificates along with new building permits. There have been no surprises. It really seems like we did our job with letting people know this was coming for quite a while, and people are submitting their permitting and all of their materials that are required to meet the Stretch Energy Code. So we are working towards the criteria number 3, which is the 4th requirement that I think we'll next meet, which is the energy reduction plan. It's taken quite a while for us to confirm all of the energy accounts, electricity, diesel, gasoline, oil, propane, for all of the town's buildings and vehicles. But we've confirmed that information and uploaded it and logged it into a software program. So now we have a baseline established. And from that baseline, we need to now write an energy reduction plan, which means that the town will commit to reducing this baseline by 20% over 5 years. In order to complete the energy reduction plan, we need to complete municipal energy assessments, which are occurring, our final assessments are occurring today and tomorrow. Some of the last facilities being audited are the schools and the wastewater treatment plants. And from there, we can complete the narrative sections and the graphics and reports needed for this energy reduction plan. I will need to come back to the select board, next month when this plan is completed for adoption. But hopefully by then, everything else in terms of our application will be ready to submit to the state. I am before you tonight for the fuel efficient vehicle policy specifically. This policy basically requires that all municipal departments purchase only fuel efficient vehicles whenever such vehicles are commercially available and practicable. It also requires that we maintain a vehicle inventory and provide a plan for replacing non-exempt vehicles with vehicles that meet the new specified efficiency ratings. So we're prepared to do all of that with the adoption of this policy tonight. Once the select board, if the select board approves this, the next step would be to seek adoption by the school board as well. The school will need to adopt both this fuel efficient vehicle policy as well as the energy reduction plan for our final application, which is due on October 31st, but I'm going to do everything in my power to keep that application going.
I just want to add that Lauren's been working really hard with the departments on this policy here and with Eric Johnson, our fleet manager from Public Works. And there were a lot of concerns, I think, at the beginning. There are some exemptions for public safety and some other types of uses. So I think we've addressed all of that and have managed to address, the concerns so people are comfortable with the policy.
To that point, we worked closely with the departments to make sure all of the exemption language was accurate. So heavy duty vehicles are exempt, specialized equipment for plowing, sanding, landscaping exempt. But again, the intention is whenever there is a fuel efficient replacement that is commercially available and practicable for Nantucket, we will commit to purchasing that kind of vehicle.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you've had initial feedback from the school board and whether or not you sensed a willingness to agree to this.
We have not engaged the school board yet. We have worked and had correspondence with the Diane O'Neill Facilities Director. And working with her, we sought confirmation from the Department of Energy Resources that there would be specific exemptions for tractors, mowers, their UTVs is what they're called, that they use for landscaping. But the school really has no vehicles that would not be exempt. So I don't foresee any issue or concern from the school board if this goes before them. All of the school's vehicles are exempt.
I saw the definition in here of what makes the fuel efficient vehicle. I didn't really understand, but what does a vehicle have a tag on it or not that it's fuel efficient? I couldn't do the math up there, but how do you figure that out? Is that a hybrid or is it electric? Is that kind of the...
It doesn't have to be a hybrid or electric, although if we get this green communities designation, there will be grant money to purchase those vehicles. It's based on a calculation, and it will be also based on the EPA combined fuel economy, and that's a changing number for vehicles for two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. So I think there is language in there that will use the most current EPA ratings, and there is a supplement that has more of that those efficiency ratings, but that is a changing target year to year.
Or do you think, and this may be your opinion, I'm sure maybe you've done a study on this, do we have the electric infrastructure to have if we wanted to say by like 2030, all town vehicles that could be electric, not things we have to haul, not big trucks.
Can the town's admin vehicles all go electric? I think that's doable, but you do have to budget. And I think with the Green Communities grant funding, we have to both find appropriate locations for electric vehicle charging stations. That won't take away public parking spots, for example, or impede in any way. So that has been a challenge to date, but it's something that goes into the planning for adopting more electric vehicles in general.
We can't take public parking spaces away legally, or just because it's not fun.
I'm just thinking of the current scenario, 37 Washington Street,
Okay. Right.
where our only two public chargers, one of which is faulty. We understand we're trying to fix that or upgrade it, is also being used by a municipal vehicle. And that's a scenario we hope to avoid. We want there to be designated spots for just municipal vehicles versus those available to the public.
Because you may or may not, I'm not speak for everybody else, but you might have a board that's okay with getting rid of a couple public parking spaces if it's part of a bigger initiative, have all admin vehicles electric or hybrid or something like that for
This
the long
policy
term.
will definitely start that discussion, I think, among every department, especially if they know that there is funding opportunity.
Yeah, they're finding in places where people are adopting electric cars, California and other areas, that there's a lot of electrical infrastructure. There's a lot of transmission and, upgrading wires. There's things that have to happen. You can, and the other part of having one is you have to be able to have someone that can fix it. And so the electric vehicles are a lot different to fix. Even if you have a Ford electric vehicle, it's just different, So you've got to, it's catching up, but we aren't there yet. I have one and it died and I just had to throw it on a flatbed to send it to Rhode Island to have it looked at. So, they're great for the island, but there's a lot more work underlying them if we really wanted to turn it that way.
So that work would be worth it.
In the long term, yes.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, one other question on it. Was this sort of taken from was sort of an outline that you sort of follow and then you talk to all the.
The Energy Office also secured a $5,000 grant that is funding the assistance of the Cape Light Compact. They write these plans for many of their towns on the Cape and Martha's Vineyard Island towns.
Okay.
And this specific policy was adopted from language we liked from the town of Dennis and Harwich, but we very much customized it based on departmental feedback. So no, this is not a rubber stamped template from anywhere else.
Is there any discussion in any of those about the age of vehicles? Because one of the things I've read is if you maintain a car, even if it's got a couple miles an hour poorer gas mileage, that you're better off maintaining that car for as long a period as you can because of the amount of embedded energy used building that car. There's a lot of energy that goes into all the aspects of the vehicle, and then there's a lot of energy that goes into sort of getting rid of the vehicle, and they're not really easily recycled yet. There's talk of that in Germany and places, but they aren't really easily recycled and things. So there is it's sort of what our forebears did. It's what the Yankees, that I grew up with, is you'd run your car as long as you could. Right. So was there any discussion of that in these policies?
There is, and I'm aware of that philosophy. Unfortunately, this policy does require that vehicle recycling, as we have done it in the past, will no longer be allowed if the vehicle being passed down from one department to another does not meet the efficiency standards. So that is one thing that would be changing under this policy.
So that's kind of going against, sort of some common sense in a way.
Over 70% of towns and cities in the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth, have adopted this policy. So
no, I understand. I'm not arguing that. Could we write that in? Could we write in that that somehow keeping vehicles that are still, in very good shape and have been maintained properly, is there a way to write that in? Because that's sort of what happens in a downturn. You can't afford to buy a bunch of new cars every year, so you keep them for a couple more years. If we write a policy, what is the unintended consequences if we write a policy that says that we can't hand them down and we can't use them? Are we, you know,
It may not be necessary at this point in time. We checked a lot of the vehicle inventory already in use. And most of those vehicles, everything from Ford Explorers to Ford F-150s, already meet the efficiency standards required. So the Jeep Patriots, a lot of our vehicles are already compliant, so there would be no issue in recycling those. But this is, I think, the language that we're required to adopt may have had older models that would have been more of a challenge to recycle.
Just a quick question on the energy reduction plan. Is that something that we would be reporting annually?
Yes, I believe it is. And that's why it's so important that we captured everything so accurately in the energy software, because now we have our baseline and we can track against it. And we're going to take credit for all of the measures that the energy analyst identifies as ways we can get to that 20% over 5 years.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for asking. 'Cause I was wondering what the oversight was on that. Like, we can do the plan and sign off on it, and then what?
Annual reporting.
Yeah.
and
Take it
then
on.
one question on the facilities.
Yes.
Are we still looking at the facilities usage, energy usage on a monthly basis?
Yes.
Are you still getting that?
Yes.
All right, good.
It's a little delayed, so it's hard to pinpoint a reason for a spike or a decline after the fact, but until there's real-time meters or in the future, I think it'll be much easier to.
Right, but the
track
the
that.
difficulty of putting it together wasn't that we aren't doing that any longer, it's just you had other difficulties.
We have so many accounts, yes.
Okay.
Many, many more than a lot of other municipalities, I'm told, in the entire Commonwealth. It was a heavy lift.
Because the reason I'm asking that is one of my, put up 6 years ago when we first did that, it was a big job that Lauren did to go building by building and tease out all the information and sort of get the energy usage, electricity and, you know, oil and whatever. And I just want to make sure that that's still happening because it's really important.
Motion to accept? Oh, do you have another
I
comment?
just wanted to comment that I'm really excited that we'll potentially be getting this designation by the end of the year. I know it's taken a lot of hard work and getting everyone on the same page, so I just want to thank you, Lauren, for getting us there.
Thank you. So due date for the application, again, is October 31st. So before then, probably in a month from now, I will be before you with the final energy reduction plan and anything else that needs to be, I think, blessed before we submit it to the state for designation review.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you,
Thanks, Lauren.
everybody.
Thank you very much, Lauren. She really has put a lot of effort into this. Very much appreciated. Okay, the monthly town management activities report. These are highlights of some of the things we've been working on lately. There's a number of plans, reports, and studies that are underway. They are all listed here. A kind of a new one is this first one listed there, Community Wildfire Protection Plan. There was a meeting last Friday that the fire chief invited me to with the State Department of Conservation and Recreation, and this has to do with developing this CWPP, and it follows a national guideline for this type of plan. The DCR is willing to engage a consultant that will develop the plan for us. They will be holding a series of public outreach sessions and stakeholder meetings to get public input. Some of the elements to this have already been discussed by groups like the Conservation Foundation, the Land Bank over the last few years anyway. So there's a bit of knowledge by those who own large tracts of land that this may impact, and they've already started doing some activities towards this, but you will be hearing more about it as we move forward in this process. Coastal Resiliency Plan, I think Matt is now on that group, and they're moving ahead with developing, hopefully, a plan. Strategic plan, we're going to be working on implementation after the board's adoption last week, and we already have been working on a number of other things. The Sustainability Office, as you board will hopefully recall, Remain gave us a grant to engage a consultant to help us determine how we would structure this office. Last week, you approved a contract for that consultant, and there are going to be some meetings happening over the next few weeks and months about that. And Lauren is looking for a grant opportunity for the Climate Action Plan. Number of meetings have been going on. These are just, some of the ones that have been taking the most time. They're all pretty much listed here. I won't go through every one of them, but paid parking is you're going to be getting an update from us in the next, sometime in the beginning of October. I think it's either the 2nd or the 9th. Some of the staff went off island last Friday to visit with Barnstable about their program, came back with a lot of really good, useful, helpful information that is relevant to our program, and we're going to be giving you an update about that. The valet group is going to come in October and give you an update about their program. I don't know that we have their numbers yet, but that's one of the things that they would present, see how it went. Are we going to be prepared? Is it worth doing it again? Number of projects. These again are just some of the ones that have involved some staff time. I will not go through all of them, but I did want to mention the last one there, N-Grid L8 project. We had a meeting yesterday with staff to go over this, and in a nutshell, to make it kind of a long story short, where we are is we have advised National Grid that they need to submit a petition for their project, and they have acknowledged that. However, some of the poles are co-owned by Verizon, so they need to get Verizon to sign off on that. So we don't have those petitions yet. We've talked about using our engineer to evaluate the planning board's alternative. We had some discussion about that yesterday, their alternative proposal, and also there may be some additional alternatives proposed by us that our engineer is going to look more at. So we're more to follow on that, but we're starting to do a pretty in-depth evaluation, or we will be. And of course, there's probably going to need to be some kind of a cost determination, because the town would bear some of this cost if if the wires are to go underground. If in the final analysis, the poles would be above ground because of, a whole variety of complications, then the recommendation would probably be that there be conditions imposed on the petitions that they must commit to a longer term plan for putting the wires underground. And that would probably involve an evaluation by whatever group or groups, town staff and others, to look at, say, the old historic district and determine by, we would have to figure out what specific areas there are. And we could say, whenever we're doing a project in that area, the idea is that these wires go underground. And that is going to require a lot of coordination, and we would probably need to hire our own project manager for that. And so that's an unbudgeted issue right at the moment, but that's where we would evaluate it and determine if that is what we want to do going forward.
On that issue, Libby, one of the things, Chapter 106, which is we were talking about that on the windmills, that may be something that worth looking into. Is that required on some of these projects? Is that, we're in a historic district and a historic town, we have a historical commission that is functioning now, maybe they could be, sort of wading in on that. And the other issue that we heard that night is handicap access. Part of what they're trying to avoid is making they're grandfathering themselves by not making anything worse from an access standpoint. We may have more leverage than we know through a couple other parts of the government rules. Mm-hmm. So I think those should be considered if they're not sort of working with us, and maybe town council should be examining those to say, hey, you know what, we haven't really done that in the past, but we're doing that now, and we want you to follow these things.
We had town council on the phone, and so all of that, those items
on 106, and yeah, that would be great.
Personnel, these are just some of the most visible items. We have filled our assistant town manager for administration, as you know. Coastal resiliency coordinator is filled, as you know, and we have some other positions that we're working to fill that are listed there. And of course, we are preparing for upcoming bargaining for contracts that expire at the end of June.
I just have one question. From the outside, the fire station looks perfect, ready to go. Are we a couple months away? Are we like January?
Well, that could be answered by almost anybody.
Nobody knows?
I shouldn't have said it like that. There are a lot of internal issues with it, and we are waiting on the contractor to finish them. And there is a lot of pressure being exerted by the project managers. Payments are being withheld until the work gets done. But I think I most recently heard, the chief took me through it a little bit on Friday, and I think the hope is mid-October. But do not hold us to that,
Right.
because that's
Okay.
what we thought 3 months ago.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay. Select board reports and comments. We have a number of hearings on liquor license violations. Amy's going to
Good
take us
evening.
through the process.
Perhaps we should begin with the swearing in, and then I'll go through the process.
Okay. I'm calling the hearing to order. Anyone who plans to give testimony on any of these items will just need to stand up to be sworn in. Might as well, just to be safe. Please raise your right hand. In your testimony, will you tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Before we get going, 4 or 5 of these are customers. Should I go in and out as we go? Okay.
Okay. So as we have here, the hearing procedures, these are for the disciplinary hearings following the summer compliance checks, the annual compliance checks that are conducted in July and August. I will go through them. I'm going to group them by violations and sanctions to kind of run through them a little bit, hopefully more efficiently. I will give a brief kind of statement on each violation, at which time the licensee may present testimony or have representation, discuss anything they would like to add. At that time, you would, as a board, take a vote, one vote to agree that a violation has occurred or not, should that be the case, and then a second vote on the sanction should a violation occurred, whether you accept the recommendation of the police department in licensing as was submitted, or if mitigating factors cause you to reduce that sanction, or aggravating factors you may consider increasing that sanction. The sanctions that were recommended between a warning and a day closure or several days closures is based on the standard recommendations that we have in our regulations. I'm going to, when I refer to Chapter 250, it's Chapter 250, the rules and regulations of the town of Nantucket governing alcoholic beverages. If I refer to Chapter 138, that's Mass General Law, which governs alcoholic beverages. So if I shorthand that, that's what I'm referring to. And basically, a first violation or one violation in these checks is generally a written warning, and I'll go over that. An additional violation that occurs on top of the sale to a minor, staff not trained or anything else, occupancy, anything else that can kind of come up, can lead to a second violation that goes to a 1 to 2 day suspension, as we have up here, and further into that. So that is what we base pretty standard our recommendations on. Yeah.
Just one quick question. Is there any expiry if a business had a written warning 8 years ago and then they got another,
Right.
There's another incident?
Correct.
Is that now?
So basically, what we do here, in the attached reports, I've detailed the investigation, what happened, the date, what was purchased, and the 5-year history of the establishment as it relates to this investigation. So generally, the standard is what has happened in the past 5 years. You can consider that if something happened way back in the 5 years and you don't think, they've done well since then and it wasn't really serious, that's for you to consider. I provide you with up to 5 years. And a good number of these establishments haven't been open that long. So I put kind of how long their license has been active. Okay. So I keep that standard across the board. So as we have outlined here in the summary, between Chapter 250 and 138 provides that the Nantucket Police Department shall have the authority to investigate potential violations of the regulations and to conduct other such enforcement as the Chief of Police deems appropriate, including the use of plainclothes police officers for the purpose of ensuring compliance with Chapter 138 and other state and local laws as may be applicable. Every year, per 138 and ABCC guidelines, we promote and advertise that checks will be taking place, compliance checks, through the summer. Generally, we do this in June. We notify them in June. And these checks take place mostly in July and August. Of all currently 96, at the time 96 active liquor licenses, 3 rounds are conducted of all these establishments. So I will tell you if they violated, all of these did 1 violation during these 3 rounds. So there are multiple rounds in each case. And detectives do supervise it. The underage operatives are community service officers, as we do tell the licensees that we use. They were all the age of 20 this summer that included in these operations. Any questions on anything as far as the process or procedure? I also included, and I won't go through the whole list, it's about 20 or 30 items that the ABCC provides that the detectives and the underage operatives must go through. Basically the process that they can't make themselves look older, photos are taken of them. They cannot consume alcohol, obviously before, during, or after, and blood tests are taken, or they're taken to make sure that they have not consumed alcohol. They cannot lie. They can't give a fake ID. If they're asked for an age, they have to give their actual age. So no lying or no anything given false information. And those guidelines are followed for each one, and they have to sign off on each one of those. Any questions on those? Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit as far as our list is concerned this evening. I'll go through a list right now. I'm going to start with the establishments. We have 9 establishments total this evening. I'm going to go with the 5, first of all, that we recommended just a written warning for. Now, these establishments all, and I'll write this for the record right now, are found to violated 1 count of MGL 138, sale or delivery of an alcoholic beverage to a person under 21 years of age, and 1 count with violation of Chapter 250 of a similar violation. None of these establishments have a prior violation in the past 5 years. Only 1 has actually been open for longer than that. And all of their servers did have server training. That's something we also look at too as well. Within 30 days of employment, they must have tips or similar server training for the state of Massachusetts, that they have been trained in server training. So that would be an additional violation. These 5 that we're going to go through all had those and have no prior violations, and are recommended a written warning. We have to, like I said, go through just each one. I'll quickly say what the date and the violation was, and then we have to take the votes. Okay. I'm going to start with After House. After House is on Monday, July 22nd. Detective Witherall, Detective Hollis, we have 2 detectives here this evening, should you have any questions about the investigation. Conducted the investigation of After House Wine and Raw Bar there, 18 Broad Street. 2 underage operatives, 20 years of age, went into the facility and were able to order beer from the server identified as Danielle Medico. Also, those servers that are charged similarly in court. That's a separate charge that the detectives take care of in court, so that is a separate situation. This is just on the license itself. And this license has only been active for 3 years with no prior violations in server training, so the recommendation is a written warning.
Do I ask if
Is there ask if they can, yeah.
anyone here that would like to speak on this? Okay. What's the pleasure of the board?
I would make a motion to accept the recommendation.
We just need to vote first that a violation has occurred on the date that was given on Monday, July 22nd, and then a vote on the recommendation.
So I would make a motion that there's been a finding of a violation.
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Now
And then
you
I
can
would,
make your next
now I would make a
motion.
motion to accept the recommendation of a written warning.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Okay.
Thank you.
The second is on Thursday, July 29th, 2019. The investigation was for a violation at Murray's Beverages located at 23 Main Street. where two underage community service officers, age 20, were able to purchase 2 6-packs of Bud Light beer. Heather Nardone was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverages to the undercover operatives. No violations in their history. And we spoke and went over that whole, so they took that very seriously. And server had proper server training, so written warning is a recommendation.
Is there anyone that would like to speak on this? Thanks. What's the finding?
I would make a motion of a finding that there was a violation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
Right.
Next.
No motion.
I would make a motion to accept the recommendation of a written warning.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. The third establishment we have is Lemon Press, and the operation was Tuesday, July the 30th, when 2 operatives went into Lemon Press at 41 Main Street and purchased a glass of Cisco beer and Red Stripe beer. Both operatives were aged 20. Alexander Rives was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverage. The license has been active for only 2 years. There have been no violations, and the server was properly trained, and therefore the recommendation is the written warning.
Is there anyone who would like to speak on this? Thanks.
I'd make a motion that there's a finding of a violation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
And I would make a motion that we accept the recommendation of a written warning.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
Great. The next establishment, similar circumstances, is Hotel Pippa. On Tuesday, July 30th, 2 community service officers entered a Hotel Pippa, which is at, the 5 Chestnut Street, and able to purchase a glass of beer. Both were aged 20, and Jeremy Wilson was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverage. License has been active for only 2 years with no violations in that time, and proper server training, so a written warning is the recommendation as well.
So, they're indicating they're here, but they don't need to speak. What's the finding?
Make a motion there's a finding of a violation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
I'll keep taking the hits. I make a motion to accept the recommendation of a written warning.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 4-0.
Okay. And the last establishment in this group is Bartlett's Farm. Excuse me. Right here. And this is for Bartlett's Farm, and this was on Friday, August the 13th, when 2 community service officers, age 20, were able to purchase a 6-pack of beer, and Crystal Barnett was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverage at that time at 33 Bartlett Farm Road. There is no history of violations at this establishment and proper server training, so again, a written warning is recommended.
Mary Ann Hamlin on behalf of Bartlett Farm. John asked me to appear tonight. I would just say that actually August 13th was a Tuesday, not a Friday. But we are aware of the report and the recommendation.
Thank you.
I actually have a question on this one, Amy. This one stuck out to me. It appears that they were asked for identification, and it seems like according to the ABCC guidelines, I think number 10 and 11, 10, that they're not supposed, or if they're asked, they're supposed to leave, and then maybe 11, or they're not supposed to make an attempt to supply identification, which to me, saying it's in the car is sort of suggesting that we could go get it if you asked for it. So this one feels like they've stepped over the bounds a bit.
I don't believe it is over the bounds. I'll refer if I'm incorrect in this point. They were asked if they had ID. They said that it was in the car, which is truth. They did not have it on them. They were not required. The person had to put in a date into the system because their system, I believe, requires the birth date. That's why it requires you to actually have an ID. So there was a bit of a we spoke to them, and there is no history of this, and unfortunately she felt bad. It was raining, there were circumstances. She had to put in a date, so I still believe it requires a warning. At that point, they said they didn't have any ID.
Yeah, but
And they
if
were
she
still able
put
to
in a
purchase it.
date, didn't they give her a date that said they were 21?
No, they did not give her a date.
So she just randomly picked a date?
I think what happened was, as Amy said, it was raining, and she didn't want to make them go out to the car and get the ID. And she relied as she can. They looked like they were over 21.
It was a mistake.
But she did ask.
Yeah.
Their point of service. I mean, I don't know anyone that goes into Bartlett's and doesn't get asked. I get asked every time I come in there.
Yeah, they're really strict about it, obviously.
And they
'cause have
they
to
took it
enter
seriously. They called me and we went over different policies and procedures. So it was not like they did not take it seriously. They did. It was a mistake. So I thought a warning is appropriate.
On this one, I suppose they're guidelines, not required. I guess I feel uncomfortable once they were asked if they had an ID. I feel a little uncomfortable with this one, so I will not be making a motion.
I would say in most cases, if they're asked for an ID and they say they don't have one, then they leave. There's certainly going to be a response. I don't think they just up and leave and walk and don't respond. So I think the motion was made by this person to, it's fine, I'll take it, That's why that happens. They're not going to just ignore the person and just possibly walk out. They just can't lie.
Okay.
And say, I'm 21 or I was born in a certain year or a certain thing of that sort.
So Rita, for you saying it's in the car is kind of like saying I don't have it. So this shouldn't qualify.
I think the two together, they've asked for. I understand that. I guess it doesn't just happen that if they ask for it, they don't just up and leave. There's a lingering, so it's a further test. But I think that suggesting that it's in the car to me is that the two together takes that one step into the gray area of sort of entrapment, really, which is actively acting towards what is it? Just basically encouraging someone to commit a crime. So I just feel that those two together, that having asked for it and then suggesting it was in the car, to me is just a little too much on this one. And I think it was very distinct from the other ones where they weren't even asked for their IDs. So this one, those two together, knowing that Bartlett's is fairly strict, I just feel was waiting for this person, baiting them a little bit more than the others. So I'm just not comfortable on this one.
I understand that, and it is gray area, and I certainly don't think they intentionally set out to, do that, but she made the effort herself to do that. Their system does require an ID, and the regulations require that they are to review that ID, and since they did not. So I understand that is a gray area, but we still view it as a violation that requires a warning. Obviously, should something happen again in the immediate future that requires this to be reviewed again, certainly that would be a circumstance to review whether, they require a certain violation.
Yeah. Again, I think it's the two together because the guidelines are there for a reason.
Right.
And then I think that sort of exacerbating factor is the rainy day. So again, I think all of those were sort of just one step too far towards baiting. I think, the guidelines are there for a reason.
I think the fact that we're here tonight is pretty sufficient warning, and it won't happen again. That it's understood. So if you could waive the violations and waive any specific recommendation, we would appreciate it.
Just to see where we're at, I'll make a motion to approve the finding that the violation occurred.
Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion. I do kind of feel what Rita's saying is correct. If they were asked for the ID and said it was in the car, and it is an unfortunate circumstance that it was raining. If it had been a sunny day, this probably wouldn't have happened. But it does kind of give me that feeling that the situation, they were so strict it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't a rainy day. And that's just a little tough to to swallow.
So if my motion fails, then there's no violation, and then there's no warning, and it's on the
Correct.
record.
It wouldn't be on the record.
Right.
I'm struggling because, I mean, the proper response from her should have been, what's your birthday, at least? And then it wouldn't have gone this way. She took it upon herself to make up a date to override their whole system. But I don't feel like if something else were to happen, that we would want to give them a heavy penalty.
I also think they wouldn't if they hadn't if they hadn't told her that the license was in the car, she wouldn't have then made up a date. So that's where, again, it gets into that crossing that line. Now she's put in a situation where she's committing a crime.
Well, let's take a vote. All those in favor of finding that there was a violation?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
It fails no matter what. We'll do, it's 2-2. So there's no finding.
It could be a warning. It won't be considered heavily on a next violation.
What?
I'm sorry.
No, there's no warning.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, this was the.
There was
warning.
no finding made.
Right.
I mean, there's a warning by just us
Correct.
having
Yeah,
a conversation.
yes, correct.
But
Correct.
not on.
Okay. All right. The next two, I'm going to discuss a similar violation of the violation of a one-count violation of 138 and 250 for service to a person under 21 years of age. The second violation is a one count of a violation of Chapter 250, all employees engaged in the service of selling alcoholic beverages and or viewing identification cards shall be certified within 30 days of employment at the licensed premises. The next two establishments I'm going to refer to, the servers were not trained, did not have current server training certificates at the time of the violation. The first establishment I'm going to refer to is at Graydon House. This check was conducted on Wednesday, August the 14th, when two underage, age 20 community service officers entered the establishment at the 17 Broad Street and ordered two glasses of white wine. They were not asked for identification. Felisa Rivera was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverages to the undercover operatives. This license was only a few years old. It was just recently transferred to new management in May of this year. So no previous violations from this or the previous management team, which is still part of the facility. So she failed to request for the identification and was not properly trained. I know that I do have a server certificate from her. She did get trained 2 weeks following this occurrence. So based on standard, what we have done in the past, this is considered a second violation. Therefore, the standard recommendation is 1 day sanction of the license, suspension of the license. And we request that it is, and I'm sorry, initially on this, it says written warning because at the time I was told that she was trained, and when I did view the certificate, it was 2 weeks following the violation. So I'm updating my recommendation. And we do it on the same, we require or request it to be the same day of the violation the following year. So the request is for the suspension of the license on August the 14th of 2020.
Is there anyone who'd like to speak on this?
Yeah, just Felisa Rivera is no longer in our employ.
Oh, just introduce yourself, please.
Taylor Oliver, Camercante, Bentuno, all the other things. And while it is our fault for not collecting the tip certification, we do tell everyone and inform them that they do need to be tip certified. 100% my bad that that wasn't followed through upon. And I guess if there is a one-day closure, I just ask that it could reflect a Wednesday versus a date, just because there's a drastic difference between a Wednesday and a Thursday.
Amy, when this happens, when someone's not tip certified,
Right.
do you go in and see if all their other servers are tip certified, or it's not part of the process?
We don't every year, as far as, I mean, that it's.
Because
that
if
would
they were
be
all certified
unmanageable.
and one slipped through, it's different than.
Right. Well, it's different. I mean, obviously the ins and outs of servers in some of these places in the summer, it's difficult. Obviously, they're going place to place. Some of the clubs and places that have more year-round employees, they kind of bring trainers in sometimes, bring other folks in and get their whole staff trained at once. You can also have the online option to do it as well. We had a meeting in June with all of the on-premise establishments, and that's the one thing we say, the minimum thing to do is that you can go online, 3 hours, $40, and get it done. It makes people aware of all the things they need to be checking, a little more aware of their responsibility, and it helps with their liability too as well. So it is one of the very basic requirements. Some cities are able to, they require the police department to check every single server because they have annual licenses. Folks come in and get an ID. It's kind of hard to do, but once this does happen, yes, most of them all make sure that they're checked, but that should be done pretty immediately. I mean, it's the basic requirement. It's been in the regulations from the start. It's pretty standard across the state in most towns. So it is a basic requirement, something we kind of harp on every year. So, but we don't, prior to the season, check for them. That was a question.
Any other questions?
Have we done it in the past where we've changed the day?
Yeah, and
From the-
that's certainly your prerogative. You
It's
could take
August
everything.
12th next year. I
Yeah.
looked it up.
Okay.
Absolutely, that's your prerogative to do so.
And how are the dates of that you do how are they picked when you go out?
Probably on staffing, and they do a couple days a week. The detectives are here, but as far as getting, everyone available, they'll do a couple days a week. So it's just availability
Over the course of the whole summer. Okay.
Yeah, and we have that list should it need to be looked at. But they have a kind of how many establishments they do each night. But again, it's 96 times 3.
Right.
And
It's
this,
a finding.
I was going to say, this liquor license was transferred recently. The no
Yes.
violations is the whole history of it.
And the same owners of the Graydon House are still involved, but they have transferred the liquor license and operations to this group. They also run Ventuno, and no violations in either establishment. Yeah. So they definitely, and like I said, they trained that person immediately, and she's no longer with the establishment.
I think it should be somewhere between doing 8/12 or doing the, I forget what it's called, but saying if you have one more violation,
Abeyance.
abeyance for one day because of what you said, because they're part of the Ventuno. We've not have any issue there.
Why don't we make the finding that there was a violation first?
Okay.
And then we'll talk about this.
I'd make a motion to accept the finding of a violation.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 5-0. Are you thinking that maybe a warning and a day held in abeyance rather than an actual closure?
Yeah, if they were part of another, if they had a history of being a problem child and had 3 violations somewhere else, then the writing's on the wall, I think. But for the first one, to close a day, I'm leaning towards not closing, but in abeyance.
And we hold that for a year usually?
So we did this last year in one violation, and we held it in abeyance to 2020. So that was 2 years. You can make that determination to that date that pending no further violations, it'll go away on August the 14th, 2021.
I think that's.
I think 2 years is
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
So it would be a written warning and then one day held in abeyance.
Correct.
Until.
And then they would automatically have to serve that day if they had another violation.
for 2 seasons.
Okay.
Should we make, instead of the 14th, which is a Saturday, should we make it like the 18th, which is a Wednesday, and they serve it or would we?
Well, you would be able to determine when they serve it if they violate again at that time. So this would just be 2 years from the date of the violation. Yeah.
Was that a motion?
That would be my motion.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 5-0. So you guys understand that? Okay.
Okay.
But I think the minutes should reflect that it should be a Wednesday if they get,
I agree.
And the next establishment, it's a similar situation. It's going to be similar violations with violation of MGL 138 and 250 for the sale or delivery to a person under 21, and then the violation of Chapter 250 with the no certificate training for the server. This establishment, it was on Wednesday, August the 14th, and this was Nantucket Prime, which is 20 Broad Street. On August the 14th, the two undercover operatives entered the establishment, both age 20, were able to purchase a Shark Tracker and Red Stripe beer. They were not asked for identification. Matthew Brissett was identified as a person who sold alcoholic beverages to the undercover operatives. Again, no violations in the history of this license. So they did not request the ID card, and Brissett was unable to provide a valid training certificate. The recommendation is a 1-day suspension to be served August 14th, 2020.
I just am wondering if we know if they got the tip certification afterwards.
Marianne can address.
Mary Ann Hanley on behalf of Nantucket Prime. Matt Sullivan, the manager, is here as well. Yes, the tip certification has been obtained. Okay. And we've checked everybody else's on the ball. We do have an issue with the recommendation. This is Matt's 6th season. He's never had an issue with anything. A 1-day suspension on next August 14th is the Friday night of Opera House weekend, it's a huge hit for everybody, including Matt's other employees that had nothing to do with it. We would request that, this time we get a warning based upon the record that we had. And if you feel compelled to issue some sort of a suspension, that it certainly would have to be held in abeyance. And, it makes sense to have it the second Wednesday in August rather than, it could be any day. If you had gone in there on a Saturday night, you'd be shutting people down on Tuesday next year, which is kind of crazy. So we all work really hard, especially in the hospitality business. There's responsibility when you have a liquor license to serve your customers, your community, and your coworkers. And we think that the sanction of a warning will serve the purpose of making sure this doesn't happen again. And as you said, on the tip certification, it's been taken care of. The problem's been dealt with. Thank you.
It's a finding.
Make a motion to approve the finding. The violation occurred.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 5-0. I would think it's similar to the last
Yeah,
one.
very similar. No history, no issues, not a problem child, no other issues with.
So I'd make a motion to issue a written warning with one day of closure held in abeyance until 2020, August 14th.
2021.
2021.
And if
For
they
2
did
years.
need to serve it, it would be held on
Yeah.
a Wednesday.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 5-0. Thank you.
Okay.
Two more.
The next establishment is for Straight Wharf Restaurant at 6 Harbor Square. This investigation took place on Monday, July the 22nd. And there's a couple things different in this situation. The operatives, both age 20, were able to purchase 2 beers, a Budweiser beer and a Red Stripe beer. They were asked their age, to which they replied they were 20. They were not asked for identification and were still served the beverages. This is Straight Wharf. I would refer to, if we have a question on as far as that, to the detectives, if they have a question on that. As far as the police report, that was the case in this situation. Brendan Connor was identified as a person who sold the alcoholic beverage to the operatives. I will just go on to say there has been no compliance check violations in this establishment in the history. The aggravating circumstances I referred to is one, obviously the failure to request an identification card, and obviously in this case, being told they were actually underage. And then also, as I attached a warning that came out in May of 2019, initially from the fire department, as far as the communication where there was overcrowding and some issues on Memorial Day weekend, which resulted in a meeting with the establishment that included the fire chief, the police chief, Nantucket Island Resorts, and Straight Wharf Restaurant as far as activities that weekend. Some difficulties with it. Obviously, overcrowding is one of the aggravating factors in our regulations that could lead to a violation. We also were, and this is not something I could include because the date wasn't able to be verified, but a video of a 12-pack of beer being sold over the counter at Straight Wharf, but it looked to be an employee that was no longer with them, so it wasn't something I could bring in for a hearing. But again, it was somewhat of a pattern that we wanted to deal with. We discussed it and said that the warning was any further violations would result in a sanction, and that's why in this case a one-day suspension was recommended to be served on that date in 2020, on July 22nd, 2020. So any questions as to the police report can be directed to the detectives.
It did seem a little funny to me that maybe you guys can help me on this. Does that happen a lot where people get asked, are you 21? And they say, no, I'm 20, and they still get served? It seemed almost like it was a typo when I was reading it.
That's rare. Detective voter for the police department.
Yeah.
So that is a rare
Yeah. And that's what
That's what the female operator told me.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Gabriel Frasco, I'm the licensee. First off, the incident 100% happened in terms of us selling a beer to the underage officer. There's no doubt about that. We don't sell Red Stripe, so it wasn't a Red Stripe, but be that as it may. Brennan, the bartender in question, 30 seconds later came to me and said, I just fell for the sting. He knew immediately what he had done. Said I didn't ask them for ID until they had the beer in front of them. Then I said, how old are you? And they left. So that's a slightly different version of the same story. Brendan has been with us for 9 years, as many things. I would hope that if they said, I'm 20, he would not have sold them alcohol. Be that as it may, it is absolutely the case that we had an overcrowding issue during Memorial Day. It's absolutely the case that we've taken steps since then. It's the first time in my 14 years there that we've had a problem with serving someone underage, or excuse me, failing one of these 3 compliance checks a year. But it did happen, and whatever the recommendation is, we'll abide by it. Thank you.
This year, that date was a Monday. Just note that. So it would be the 20th in 2020 if you were to mirror the same day of the week.
I have questions about the fire occupancy, but do you want to get approval of the finding first before I start asking?
Well, you
go ahead.
Because it's a little different than the actual
it's part of it, and this
violation.
is different than others. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a question. I'm sorry.
So
Is
you
there
do
a
have a question?
Go ahead and ask the question now.
For me, and I kind of briefly chatted with this with Amy already, that they seem separate. They're very important issues, but I think we should find businesses, have a policy, or find a way if they're overcrowded, if there's an issue, find them 500 or whatever it is, whatever we can do, and keep it separate from the liquor.
It's currently, if I can just comment on
Sure,
that,
yeah.
it's currently even in our regulations, and it is one of the aggravating factors in violations. It's already in the regulations as because liquor licenses, it's required to have that, the occupancy and the COI. You can't get a liquor license without it. So it is very much part of the liquor license, and it's already part of our regulations. So we take into account aggravating factors, and then they can certainly present mitigating factors. And they have been responsive since we had this meeting. But because of this, the overcrowding and that weekend prompted the meeting and findings of some other things that were happening to say we need to kind of really kind of pull together here, and they have been responsive. That absolutely, he very responsive. So, but this had been said, any further violations, and boom, this kind of happened immediately after. So, responding to that.
Just two things to add to that. One, we our bar sales for the first time ever are down this year. They're down 20%. And that was not a mistake. That was a feature. We limited our occupancy from the time of this meeting moving forward. Secondly, as Chief Murphy said at the time, we actually were not over occupancy at the time. We have one occupancy number for the whole building. We have applied. We have an application in. We've had an application in for a while for a new occupancy number, which is broken down by room, which is now how it's supposed to be. But our occupancy number dates back to 1976. Our occupancy is smaller than crew or club car. Anyway, we were over in the bar, according to Chief Murphy's reading of what should be broken down by room. In other words, we have one number for the whole building, but there were too many people in the bar. We were not over our entire number, but there were too many people in the bar. And again, we don't dispute that at all. That happened, and since then we have followed his number. He walked it off that day and said, "This is how many square feet you have. This is how many people should be in here," and that's the number we've followed since.
That's correct, and they've submitted paperwork and things of that sort to bring it up to code and to bring it into compliance. So yes.
If there was a second occupancy violation, and say there wasn't the sale of the alcohol,
right?
Would that be coming in front of us, and would that be treated as?
That's. I don't want to get too much into that answer in case I'm incorrect. I don't think Chief Murphy's here. They have, as far as over occupancy, there's I think a 3-step like warning, and then there's a large fine, and then you got to put sprinklers in. So depending on the type of building. So I think we went through this at one point, and I think they're looking into having their own types of hearing officer or hearing type of process. So they're definitely following through on that process so that it can be handled too as well. But it also does affect the liquor license and is part of those regulations as well. So just basically to back up, like I said, again, we had this discussion too about whether it's separate or another type of violation. That instigated the whole conversation and some other items that had happened, and that any further violations would be a further sanction. So that's where that's coming from.
If we did something where there was a 1 to 2 day abeyance, would either sale of alcohol or an occupancy issue trigger that?
Any type of violation on the liquor license?
Okay.
Yes. Because again, that is already part of our regulations and part of the liquor laws. It's state and local.
But the overcapacity would trigger the liquor license violation?
It could, yes. Yeah, they would report it to licensing.
How are we treating patios versus interior spaces on occupancy now?
Oh, I don't know if I want to answer that. I would let the building commissioner and fire, so I don't say anything wrong.
Well,
but they're separate spaces. Basically, what the goal is for 2020, what should be happening, and most places where we need this are submitting their plans, submitting if they have separate types of setups for different places. Each room should have its own number. The building is going to have an occupancy number because whatever the building can handle, floor load, entrances, exits, emergency type of situations, how many bodies can get through the door in an emergency, all different formulas for that. But each room is going to have it. You can have 100 people in the building at one time, but only 20 people in that bar, whatever that is. So each room should have a occupancy sign so that you walk in like it is standard across the Commonwealth. I walk in here, only 50 of us should be in this room. The COI will have the building number, what the building occupancy is, and then each room should have what is acceptable for that room.
Well, the reason I'm asking the patio question is one of the things I heard is, patio can have as many as you want. There's not, and so, and what's happened is you can have more people. At least the way it was being interpreted
Right.
5 or 6 years ago, we were kind of encouraging people to go out in patios. So we're encouraging them to go outside, and then we're getting yelled at because it's so noisy. And so that was why, and a few other reasons, why we were saying, and everyone should be treated fairly,
Yep.
which is, I think, what we're trying to get to. But there were, a lot of this was dealt with through their zoning decisions, which have all been lifted because there's no parking requirements any longer, and it's all dropping to us. There's a lot, it's very complicated, and one of the mitigating factors, I think, from a restaurant standpoint, they're all in competition with each other. The whole island, if I look at my numbers this summer, we have so many tourist homes that the peak times of the year, Memorial Day weekend, 4th of July, those first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of August, every single place is just getting their heads kicked in. I had one of the fancy restaurants tell me they were serving 350 dinners with half the staff they needed in the kitchen all summer long because they couldn't hire people. So they're under unbelievable stress. The town is too.
Yeah.
The town is trying to do stuff, but the restaurants are under unbelievable stress, and so some of this, they're trying to,
All these businesses need to make all of their money for the year in 3 months.
Yeah, and they're willing to push some limits to do so. and
Well,
that's
but
understandable.
here's the other thing: is the peaks now. The weekend you get killed. It's twice, 3 times as busy
absolutely.
as the Wednesday before. It
Right.
didn't used to be like that, and so the whole island has shifted.
Yeah.
And the slow days are even slower.
Right.
And so really, it's not. We're in a very difficult business environment in a lot of ways, and I think we just have to remember that. So.
Yep. And as far as I don't think I answered your question directly, but patios should have a number too as well. 'Cause
And it
some
should
could
be
have-
fair. It should be the
Yeah.
same. If you have the same amount of square feet, it should be the same for everybody.
Well, there's different things in consideration. Floor loads is if it's raised, how can you get out? If they have sides up and you have 2 exits that people are getting out in emergency. So there's a couple other things besides square footage that come into it as well. But they each space should have a number too. So wherever you are, you should be able to see how many people should be in that space.
There are some patios I know that we have said only the number of seats that you have. There's nobody standing.
Right.
That when we've done their licensing.
Right.
Yeah.
But we don't have, we've said that, but it should be consistent. Who's looking at it to make sure it's consistent and make sure it's fair? That's the complaints that I was getting from some of the hotel, restaurants, is that, they're getting something that I don't get. How come they get to do that? So I just think we want to make sure.
Right.
I think you guys are getting closer, but I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that we are.
Yeah, everyone has the same requirements as far as what they need to submit. And the building commissioner makes a final determination on that number with the input of the fire department too.
Is there a finding?
I'll make a motion to approve the finding that the violation occurred.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 5-0. I kind of liked where Rita was heading with this of maybe I feel like they have gotten the message. They've been in business a long time. They've already made changes. What if we did 2 days in abeyance for 2 years?
I'll make a motion to see how the board feels with 2 days in abeyance till 2021. It was July 22nd.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I think I like the abeyance. I think we've made huge strides in the last 3 years on the whole occupancy kind of craziness, and I think we're almost there. And for me, I said this in the beginning, the occupancy doesn't weigh in for me, and I know it should. But when you asked the question, if there was 2 violations of occupancy, this wouldn't come to us for a liquor to take a day. They had to close. So to me, it's still kind of separate. So I think an abeyance makes more sense.
But I think 2 days makes more sense because there were kind of multiple things going on.
Yes, yes. I think it's a nice
That only
balance.
gets triggered if they violate.
Correct.
So, then
And occupancy could violate it.
Yeah. And I just want to confirm that everyone is comfortable that Straight Wharf understands what that occupancy is.
They're working through. They've been responsive. They're working through it, and yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously 5-0.
Okay. The following establishment is for Nantucket Trading Post. The date for this was Tuesday, July the 30th, for the trading post located at 12 Nobodere Farm. Two of the underage operatives, both who are 20, were able to purchase a 12-pack of beer and were not asked for identification. Catherine Marquez was identified as the person who sold the alcoholic beverage and did have a training certificate. In this case, we do have history of violations in the 5-year history. There were 2 prior charges of sale or delivery of alcoholic beverages to a person under 21 years of age and 1 prior charge of staff not suitably trained. For the sanctions in 2016, they were given a written warning for the sale to an underage operative. In 2018, they had a service to underage operative and staff not suitably trained, in which they received a 1-day suspension that they served this August the 7th in 2019. And in that case, 1 day was held in abeyance until August 8th, 2020. So the circumstances we looked at in this failure was a 3rd violation in 3 years. There was a 4th violation in 2014, but that was the prior owner that they transferred following that. Due to the 1 day held in abeyance, should you find the violation did occur, that 1 day suspension must be served due to the additional violation. The Blue Book guidelines for this many violations in history is a 3 to 4 day suspension of the liquor license. Therefore, the recommendation is a 3-day suspension of that liquor license to be served July 30th to August 1st of next year, 2020.
And I just want to disclose, that I live in this area, but I'm not a direct abutter.
Is there anyone here to speak on this? Okay. It's finding.
I'd make a motion to accept the finding of a violation.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I'll second it.
Oh,
Sorry. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 5-0.
Quick question for
This
Amy.
one's a little different than the
Yeah.
others.
The 1 day that's held in abeyance till 2020, that still has to be
That has to be served.
next year.
That has to be served, and it can be recommended when it's served,
Okay.
but I kept it consistent because a violation, you did find that there was a violation that occurred that has to be served. So 1 day
So
is
that's 1 day
absolute.
next year.
Correct. The additional 2 days that we recommended, that's for you to discuss.
So it's additional 2 days, not additional
Correct.
3.
I did it 3 days, correct. Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
That is correct. That is correct.
Total is the
Yes.
recommendation.
Yes. I
So
do
3
believe
to
they're
4
taking it
includes-
seriously. However, this is, 3 years now. So an area with a school too. So it's a concern that it's multiple times.
And what are those days? 30th to the
Yeah,
1st?
It's a Thursday to a Saturday.
That's a pleasure. Or questions?
Yeah, question with Amy. How have they been responsive to you over last year, this year?
I mean, they're responsive, and I believe, I don't think the Sun has come in and said that they're kind of trying to, do better, and was in several times to find me. So I know that they certainly knew that they needed to step up and take this seriously. But again, 3 years is, something to take into consideration too as well. We haven't had that many multiple repeats in this situation. So as much as I feel they're earnest in that, it's still, something I can't just let go.
It'd be different if they blew you off.
Correct.
You
No,
know,
they did.
and so-
They have definitely have not blown us
Okay.
off. Yeah.
My only concern is kind of, we talked about moving the restaurant ones to a non-busy day, having it be on the weekend. Would we rather midweek, or is the 3rd time around keep it on the weekend?
I'm not sure. Could you answer when's your peak business? I know you get a lot of weekday lunch business. I mean, does it matter if it's on a weekend or a weekday?
To repeat, he said a weekday.
He said a weekday would be
Weekday,
better.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, July 30th next year is a Thursday. So it'd be Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Yeah.
If we did all 3 days together.
What could you do? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
And then I'll just add, in this situation, an off-premise location that serves other things, we have allowed, and it is allowed, that if the alcohol is put in locked storage, this happened with 167 Raw, they were able to stay open, but alcohol was not allowed to be served. We had to make sure it was put away in locked storage and could not be accessed by the public. So they have that ability, as long as we can check that that was being done.
Basically store it, lock the fridge.
Right.
But,
And those, some places obviously can't, but in certain situations, it's not a huge display.
Right.
They are able to do so, so they would not be completely shut down as long as they followed that
can do all-
procedure.
Oh,
Stay,
so they
stay
can-
open and do their food
They
service.
could lock it up, they could take it out and still stay
Correct.
open, whatever.
Correct.
Oh, well, that's, so I'm fine with the 30th, 31st, and 1st, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
I guess I'd go somewhere in the middle and do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Give them kind of that one Saturday, but
They can still stay open.
yeah.
Straight Wharf, those places have to close. The whole restaurant, the whole place closes, right?
Well, I mean, most likely they're probably not
Right.
going to serve dinner without
Right,
being able to serve.
right. And this is a small part of their business. I've been in there, I've seen, it's not that much. I don't think it's gonna,
Is that a motion?
my motion, yeah, is to, yeah, my motion is for the recommendation.
Are you, well, it said 3 to 4, are you recommending?
No, the MPD recommendation is 3 days suspension.
Okay.
And that's inclusive.
That's
of
inclusive,
the one
okay.
billed in advance.
Okay.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
And clarification on
Um,
dates, are we going 28 to 30, 29 to 31?
What was in the
30 days.
What was
recommendation?
recommendation?
Because they can stay open
Okay.
for everything else. But I mean, I would just recommend like some of the other stores, just they card everybody, no
Right.
matter
Right, right.
how old you look.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Can I make a general comment? Oh, I just asked Amy right before we started if that June 6th meeting was attended by everybody and if these people who violated their liquor license had attended. She said it was mostly restaurants that came, so I just think next year we should make an outreach to make sure that the stores come as well.
Yeah, it was an on-premise meeting because the fire marshal came in and it was basically on occupancy and those types of things. So, but they all did attend. Great, thanks.
Yeah, I know it's tough when you're so busy, you know it's important, but you get caught up in every day running the business and you let that slide and then they're not,
Thank you.
they haven't taken the test.
And I looked
Or
at
the
last year's and this year's, and we've had 9 violations both years. We have 96 licenses. I know that they do a lot of checks. That's about 300 checks, but to still kind of slip through 10% of the time seems a little bit like, I don't know how to make it a little bit better, but I understand that it's tough.
Well, something's changed because
2
the year
years
before
ago,
that,
yeah,
right,
zero.
was zero.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't think there's been more training or less training or
Well,
probably
if
been
it's
more.
90, it's about 3% because it's 90, which in the
96.
96, so times, they're going 3 times to each. So really, that's not too bad, and some of these places are so busy, like you just can't imagine. Like, are you going to stand and wait for someone to run outside to get their license while the line's backing up on you? I mean, there's things like that, and they should do that. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but the pressure that they're under, you're at a bar and you've got a line of people and half of them are mad at you because you're not serving them fast enough. I mean, there's a lot going on, and we're, as an island, we've made it easier. And there's more people here at the peak, and it's easier to get here. And there's more tourists home. And they pack them all in on the key days. And this, some of this is what's happening. I think these businesses are under extreme pressure, a lot of stress.
Especially a lot of the violations were on new businesses, so they're extremely under pressure trying
They're
to
still getting-
compete with
getting
existing
organized.
businesses. But we can't let it slide just because they're new.
I said this last year. This happened to me at Foods, right? On a Friday night, had a line out the door. She just we were so busy, she just didn't check, and we got a written warning. But next year, got rid of the booze. They want it. It happens.
Did you get it? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure you didn't have another question. Oh, yep. Just come up to the mic and state your name.
Because we have a date evaluation before we bought the business still affecting us, our name. We bought the business in 14 and we have election 2013. And I see an Orsa record.
I don't think we were.
What was put into consideration were the 2016 and 2018
Oh, that's
violations.
Okay, that's okay. Just make sure.
So we didn't. It was in there, but we didn't consider that in the recommendation.
Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Committee reports.
Nothing.
Kristen, you got a list?
I don't have too many. We just had an NCTV 18 board meeting last night, and it was really nice. It was my first board meeting since being on select board, so I thought it was really interesting to kind of see everything that they're doing and just still negotiating with Comcast. So I'll report back when I have more.
I've been asked to speak at Rotary on our strategic plan. They want me to do a similar presentation to what I did at the Civic League. So that'll be on October 2nd. I just thought I would let you all know. And gearing up for CPC. That's coming soon.
I've got a couple things. Coastal Resiliency met Tuesday, and it was interesting. We're moving along, we'll see. I'm not sure that the group itself feels like it will write the report, but it will get the report written. Well, you know, so that was sort of follow up. NPDC was on Monday night, and that's where I saw the review that we talked about that I hope we put on the, you know, on next week's agenda because it was done really well. They also talked about possible warrant articles, and so some of our, you know, some of the articles that we're talking about were sort of pools again. Do pools come up in some manner? Who looks at those? There was a bunch of zoning, which we didn't really get into much depth on. There was discussion, I think, of second dwellings. Is that something people want to deal with? So there were a few different things that were brought up in regards to that. One of the things that was interesting to me was that the HDZ review, it's already funded. I think it was funded $30,000 to review the HDC is, you know, sort of been put on hold partly because I think the HDC is too busy and it just hasn't been done. And so I still think it's fairly important. It might be something that we want to consider. Is there a way to run that through the historical commission or do it some other way? And I don't have the answer, but I just think, you know, we keep talking about it. We've been talking about it for 7 years. It was one of the first topics we talked about when I first got on the board, and nothing has really progressed. So maybe if our historic commission is up and running and competent, which they seem to be, once you read the report, maybe that might be a direction that we can go to have some of that work done. The money is there. And then what else? I would like to request that the follow-up on what Mr. Bender talked about this beginning of our meeting is on next week or the week after. It's really important. I think the enforcement and the follow-up on this water quality is one of our large goals. And there's certain things that people don't even think about. We can have these wetlands that take care of clean the water, but every so many years, those wetlands are supposed to be dug out and all that stuff's supposed to be brought to the right place. Otherwise, it's not really doing the good it's supposed to do. You can have fancy systems to clean the parking lots, but if they aren't, cleaned out and filtered, all you've done is dig holes and put the pollution closer to the water table. So, it's not just the fancy engineering and everything, it's the yearly oversight and making sure that these things are enforced and done properly it's more important almost than the original. You'd be better off with, in the case of a parking lot, you'd be better off doing nothing and having a dirt or a gravel parking lot that at least filters it. requiring people to put in $100,000 equipment that is used improperly is actually making it worse. So I think these issues are really important, and I hope that whoever is enforcing and responsible, I hope we get that report and we really look at those items, because they, it's crucial. And I think that's it.
Just a quick Affordable Housing Trust update. We had our meeting yesterday, and Tucker, possibly Tucker and Ken will be doing a presentation of what we saw yesterday as regards our budget. And I think it'll be very valuable for this board to see. There's so many different sort of buckets where money is coming from within the Affordable Housing Trust with various restrictions on them. So I think getting a good feel for where those are will be great. And we also looked at a pilot project that will be starting, which is really coming together of something that was part of the Affordable Housing Trust strategic plan and the work Housing Nantucket did with WPI, where the Affordable Housing Trust has been talking about the possibility of a down payment assistance program for at least the 2 years I've been on the trust. And after a bit of back and forth with Anne and review, based on her experience, she said that's really not something that seems to be an issue for people, but getting more covenant lots on the market is. So we are launching a pilot project where there's an 18-month loan, $10,000, to assist with the cost of creating a covenant lot. So we have an amount allocated for that, and that should be starting soon. But Tucker will be doing a presentation on that in October. That's it.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Who's Robert Dickinson?
Oh, that's Ebob.
Huh?
Ebob. He's the assistant finance. It's Bobby spelled backwards. Ebob. He was worked for years with Wes at the Coffee Roasters.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of bigger, heavier guy.
I don't know why the name just stuck out. And I was like,
Bob Dickerson. Ooh.